Hello everybody and welcome to this webinar. My name is Christopher Bolson. I'm a project manager for the Community Planning Support in Scotland website. I work at the Improvement Service, and today we're hosting this webinar about the Fair Scotland Duty, the local child poverty action plan's relation to the Fair Scotland Duty, and we're also hearing from Shelley Hague from Angus Community Planning Partnership, who's a community planning manager there, of some of her experience around implementing these duties. Here at the Improvement Service where I'm sitting, I have Miriam McKenna with me, who's a program manager for the Fair Scotland Duty, and I have Hanna McCulloch, who's the National Co-ordinator for Local Child Poverty Action Plans. That's a short and spiffy title.
Thank you.
So you can hear we have 3 presentations today. They are going to be about 10 to 15 minutes each, and then after the presentations we're going to have a Q&A session. If you have any questions for Miriam, Hanna or Shelley, please type them in the sort of questions panel you have below, and then I will pass on the ones we have time for towards the end. I hope we will finish before the hour, but let's see. It's a big subject, so I'll hand over right away to Miriam to start. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Christopher. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to take you through a quick run through of the Fair Scotland Duty, what it actually is. If I can make this move down, what have I done? There we go, sorry. What the Fair Scotland Duty is, some of the definitions that are within it, within the guidance that you've probably read, but just a quick skim through them. Some of the key things that came out of the engagement events that we had in March, focusing pretty much on what needs to be in place to deliver on the Fair Scotland Duty. Some questions for you and some thinking around an outcomes-based approach to delivering on the Fair Scotland Duty. I'll give a quick couple of examples of practice and highlight where you can access some resources about the duty and for implementing it. So the background to this is the Scottish Government's Fair Scotland Conversation and the reviews of the poverty commissions that were held in Scotland in a variety of different areas. And 5 ambitions were agreed in the Fairer Scotland Action Plan, which are here. So a Fairer Scotland for all, ending child poverty, strong start for all young people, fairer working lives and a thriving third age. In proposing 50 actions on top of this for a Fairer Scotland, the Scottish Government says it's working to meet its wider equality, human rights and sustainable development goal obligations, so it ties into much wider delivery for public services in Scotland. The Government recognises that creating a Fairer Scotland will require input from the whole nation, so from government itself, communities of all kinds, people with experience of poverty, business and industry, the public and the third sector, all to work together to achieve change. So the Fairer Scotland Duty itself was the first of the Fairer Scotland Action Plan actions. So they said in 2017 they would introduce a new socioeconomic duty on public bodies. The new duty is intended to help make sure that the sector takes full account of poverty and disadvantage when key decisions are being made. And the Government also committed to make the most of the connection between this duty and those on equality and human rights, and a similar duty on education authorities. And the action plan also includes, the Fairer Scotland action plan also includes the introduction of the Child Poverty Act, which is what Hannah's going to be talking about later on. So what is the Fairer Scotland Duty? It places a legal responsibility on particular public bodies in Scotland to actively consider how they can reduce inequalities of outcome caused by socioeconomic disadvantage when they're making strategic decisions. You might be familiar with this diagram from the guidance. It outlines what the Government have identified as the key drivers of socioeconomic disadvantage and what the inequalities of outcome that result of living in socioeconomic disadvantage. It doesn't cover absolutely everything, but it gives you a general overview of where they expect the disadvantage to come from and what's going to be the result of that for people within communities. So the duty came into force in April 2018, and public bodies must actively consider how they can reduce inequalities of outcome in any major strategic decision they make and publish a written assessment showing how they've done this. Applied from the 1st of April last year and doesn't cover any decisions made before this date, and it doesn't override other considerations, for example, equality or best value. So where you've got other statutory duties, it doesn't override it. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission are the regulator for the duty. So it's a key consideration underpinned by statute, and the first 3 years are seen by the Scottish Government as an implementation phase, with them or the Improvement Service potentially developing the guidance over this time, but hopefully in partnership with all the organisations who are subject to the duty. The key thing is not to approach the duty in a way that's a tick box exercise, but to be meaningful and influences decision making, helping to achieve strategic corporate inequality outcomes and make sense to you in relation to the work that you do and the processes you already have in place. But it's also got to make sense to the people and communities you serve and help bring about demonstrable change. I'd imagine you'll all be familiar with what socioeconomic disadvantage is. So from the diagram earlier and the 4 areas listed in the guidance are low income compared to most others in Scotland, low wealth, material deprivation and area deprivation. So in broad terms, socioeconomic disadvantage means living on a low income compared to others in Scotland with little or no accumulated wealth, so no savings, leading to greater material deprivation, restricting the ability to access basic goods and services. And it can be experienced in communities of place or communities of interest. Socioeconomic disadvantage involves a complex interaction of a wide range of factors from poverty to health, education, limited social mobility, housing and a lack of expectations. Someone who experiences socioeconomic disadvantage may be income deprived, live in a deprived area and or belong to a community of interest that disproportionately experienced poverty and social inequality, for example, lone parents or some larger ethnic minority families. Scotland's seen a significant increase in income and wealth inequality and child poverty in recent years, and the links to equality and diversity work are quite clear. Today in Scotland, disabled people are twice as likely to be unemployed as non-disabled people. Ethnic minorities in Scotland are twice as likely to be living in poverty, twice as likely to be unemployed and 4 times as likely to be living in overcrowded housing. In the leading industry sectors, women are too often concentrated in junior or middle management posts or in low-paying roles. And on average, women earn £182.90 per week less than men in Scotland. So there are clear links across the public sector equality duty and the Fairer Scotland duty. So in terms of defining equality of outcome, it's already been set out in the diagram, but it's about any measurable differences between those who have experienced socioeconomic disadvantage and the rest of the population, for example, in health, life expectancy or educational attainment. It'd be interesting for when we get to the Q&A bit to actually hear your views on how you define inequality of outcome in your LOIPs or any other strategic documents that you have. Do you have a clear definition within that, and particularly for your locality plans? So it'd be good if you could feed some of that back to us. In terms of defining the strategic level, the duty is set at that high level public sector decision making, and it's to apply to decisions which affect how a public body fulfils its intended purpose over a significant period of time. The kind of thing that's included in the guidance is strategy documents, decisions about setting priorities, allocating resources and commissioning services. So all decisions agreed at a board level or equivalent. So that includes things like local outcome improvement plans and locality planning. The idea is that, from the Scottish Government's idea, is that the strategic decisions will have a major impact on the way in which other tactical and day-to-day operational decisions are taken, but they're not in themselves tactical or operational. So consideration of how to reduce socioeconomic inequalities can obviously improve any decision making, whether the decision in question is strategic or not. The statutory focus of the duty is at the strategic level, but the ultimate aim is for the consideration of socioeconomic disadvantage to be mainstreamed, much like the public sector equality duty. So every decision that you're taking should take into account impact on inequality as a result of socioeconomic disadvantage. This has been happening across public bodies and community planning partnerships in Scotland for years. We will have been thinking about this, we've built it into our documents, but it's just not been captured in something like a Fairer Scotland duty assessment or something similar. So when sort of talking across different organisations, particularly in local government and community planning, it is something that we've been considering, but we haven't had to evidence it before, although it would have been incorporated into our plans. In terms of defining due regard, you should be familiar with the concept of this because it's been in place from the public sector equality duty for many years, but it focuses on active consideration and actively considering with an open mind whether there are opportunities to reduce inequalities of outcome caused by socioeconomic disadvantage. Serious consideration must be given as early as possible in the decision-making process. So it's very similar to the impact assessment process that you carry out for public sector equality duty, in that there are optimal points where you can actually start doing your assessment and considering it, but sometimes you need to have a wee bit more meat on the bone before you can actually make any decisions about it. So any major plans, whether your next local outcome improvement plan or equivalent corporate plan or budget is developed and being decided on at board or committee, then you must pay due regard to the Fairer Scotland duty. And remember, you will need to have that record of the assessment process to publish it. And you may want to engage with those who the decision will directly affect, keeping in mind proportionality, but also as set out in the guidance, there's not an obligation to achieve a result. So unlike the mitigation that you would have to put in place if you were breaking the law in regards to public sector equality duty, you wouldn't necessarily have to have achieve a result from this, but it would be odd if you didn't put mitigating actions in place if you knew you were going to further inequality or increase socioeconomic disadvantage in your local area. So this is the suggested process for meeting the Fairer Scotland duty from the guidance that the Scottish Government develops in partnership with the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So engaging with a number of authorities, it seems that most are looking at developing integrated impact assessment to include the Fairer Scotland duty. And I know that a number of you will have already been considering poverty and inequality in your impact assessment. We've got some examples of them on the K-Hub. So your integrated impact assessment process could cover equality, health inequality, poverty, could be used to screen if you need strategic environmental assessment, things like that. And the Scottish Government are keen for the public bodies subject to the duty to be innovative in their implementation of the duty. So you don't necessarily have to follow this diagram and what's set out in it, because they've not been prescriptive in the guidance other than setting out the key requirement for paying due regard. So it's about thinking about how you would deliver on it and integrate it into the systems that you already have. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission have said that they're a bit concerned about integrated impact assessment, partly because it could become a tick box exercise, but they're also worried about it might dilute the focus on the public sector equality duty. So it's important that if you are using integrated impact assessment, to ensure that you're meeting your statutory obligations, particularly for the public sector equality duty. You can use the data and evidence that you would use for both. I think the information that you'd be collecting for equality impact assessment would help provide evidence for the assessment process for the Fairer Scotland duty as well. Quick links to other duties and legislations. There's a fuller explanation of this on the K-Hub in a set of slides, and if you were at one of the events, then you would have seen these as well. So each of the acts mentioned here have a component to tackle socioeconomic disadvantage, and you're all very aware of the LOIPs and the development of locality plans being mentioned in the Community Empowerment Act as strategic decisions and tackling the inequalities required within them. So most inequality and disadvantage comes from not having enough money in your pocket and driven by socioeconomic disadvantage. So it ties quite well into the work of LOIPs and community plans and the locality plans. The Education Act introduced measures to improve Scottish education, including improving the attainment of pupils from poorer backgrounds. So Part 1 of the Act, School Education, introduces a duty on Scottish ministers and education authorities to take steps to reduce inequalities for pupils as a result of socioeconomic disadvantage or other causes. So education services are actually already working towards tackling the disadvantage. And the Fairer Scotland duty takes a broader view than the Child Poverty Act, but they're very closely tied and looks at wider causes of and experience of inequality in a wider population group, for example, including people who don't have children, and covers the wider definition of inequality, including health inequality, lack of dignity and respect, and community safety and so on, which would be outcomes for children too, but covers the whole population. And in considering human rights, the economic, cultural and social rights are the main ones with a link to the Fairer Scotland duty, and there's an international covenant. These include workplace rights, the rights to social security and the right to participation in cultural life, rights to housing, food, water, healthcare and education. And these are set out in the international covenant, which has not been incorporated into Scotland laws, but the First Minister's Advisory Group on Human Rights has a recommendation for those economic, social and cultural rights to be incorporated into Scotland laws in the near future. So it's something we need to be thinking about how we meet them if that is introduced. A large proportion of the inequality and disadvantage that people with protected characteristics experience is as a result of socioeconomic disadvantage. So clear ties into the public sector equality duty, which I've mentioned several times. So you can't divorce them from each other. Your strategic needs analysis for things like your LOIP or your children's services plans would probably have highlighted your areas of disadvantage, and the LOIPs and locality plans as well obviously have that and are seeking to reduce inequality and poverty. So I think the data that you've gathered for your LOIPs will feed any Fairer Scotland Duty assessment that you undertake, and is also very useful for your local child poverty action reports. This is a very quick overview of some of the priority groups from the legislation, trying to show the sort of connections between them all. So the Education Act and Children and Young People's Act obviously target all children and young people, with an emphasis on those with poorer outcomes. The other 4 pieces of legislation which are listed here target particular groups. So the Community Empowerment Act broadly focuses on those experiencing inequality of outcomes in a range of its parts. The Fairer Scotland Duty focuses on those on a low income compared to most others in Scotland, those with low wealth and in material deprivation who may be living in deprived communities or are part of a community of interest. The Public Sector Equality Duty has the 9 protected characteristics, some of which correlate with the groupings within the child poverty guidance, particularly age, gender/sex, lone parents are more likely to be female, disability and race, because there's very specific focus on them. So from the events that we had, there were some clear things that need to be in place to help deliver the Fairer Scotland Duty. There's quite a clear correlation with these across to what was put in place for delivering the Public Sector Equality Duty from the 2010 Act, but also it matches across to the work of Just Fair, who did some study on English authorities who were acting as if the public sector and the Fairer Scotland Duty was in place, or a socioeconomic duty was in place. So the key things are you need leadership from the top. So senior management need to take a leadership role and champion the reduction of socioeconomic disadvantage and the resultant inequality. They need to make sure consideration is given to the duty when making key decisions. Awareness of the duty across all organisations at all levels would be beneficial, with training for employees on the duty. The aim would be to make consideration of socioeconomic disadvantage and inequality routine so that all decisions were informed by it. So essentially you're mainstreaming it. Toolkits were highlighted as being useful to help with the assessment, and examples of integrated impact assessment are available on the Fairer Scotland Duty K-Hub, along with examples of Fairer Scotland Duty assessments that Scottish Government have carried out, and any other authorities, for example Angus, would have been able to find assessments that have been done. Good community engagement, involvement and capacity building with those who are experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage is needed to help with impact assessment, building evidence and making the right changes to service delivery and budget decisions. It is recognised that community engagement may be under-resourced in many areas, but attempting to bring together all community engagement taking place across organisations and local areas could help build the evidence base and ensure citizens' voices are heard. And obviously through community planning, that's one of the ways you can do that, working with all your partners and seeing who's carrying out any engagement. Many people experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage will not be able to engage with traditional community engagement processes, so it's really important to identify the best way to take engagement to them. Recognising that people are proud and may not want to engage in a poverty or disadvantage conversation. In order to identify if an organisation is having any local impact, it's important to gather relevant data as well to underpin it all. There are a number of sources of information available for both national and local information. And it's important not to get hung up on absolutely precise data, because a lot of it doesn't go down to local level, but we need data that's good enough to help understand what's going on locally, and that should be appropriate for the processes of carrying out a Fairer Scotland Duty assessment. The Scottish Government are working to expand their equality evidence finder to include more information that's relevant to the Fairer Scotland Duty. So the Equality and Human Rights Commission advised Scottish Government when they were developing the guidance to take an outcomes-based approach to the Fairer Scotland Duty. An outcomes-based approach is what we've been taking in community planning for quite some time. Locality planning is intended to tackle inequalities taking that outcomes and place-based approach. And the question is whether or not locality plans can be how a community planning partnership focuses delivery of the Fairer Scotland Duty, because if you're doing that data analysis, community engagement, to do your locality plans, you could do a Fairer Scotland Duty assessment to see if you're paying due regard to the duty, and that would be part of your evidence base as well. So you need to balance equality with socioeconomic inequality as part of that, and learn from the implementation of the Public Sector Equality Duty. The question is, what does an outcome-based approach to tackling inequality caused by socioeconomic disadvantage look like? And I'm sure you've got lots and lots of examples, so it'd be really good to hear about them. I don't have time to go through all your locality plans, so if there's anything that in particular that you would like to highlight, that would be really, really helpful. Because I really think through the locality planning process, we can deliver the Fairer Scotland Duty across Scotland from a community planning perspective. So some quick examples of practice. These were at the events that we held in March. Unfortunately, the NHS Lanarkshire Monklands Hospital Fairer Scotland Duty assessment that they carried out, which was really had robust engagement with communities, low-wage staff, and checked some key statistics, transport and so on. The report hasn't gone to their board yet, so it should be going at the end of May. So once that's happened, I'm hoping that they'll let me put the presentation and the video up online. So for all of these, they're actually videos. The links are on the Fairer Scotland Duty K-Hub if you want to have a look at them. Murray have carried out Fairer Scotland Duty assessments of some of their budget decisions, and one of them to create leisure passes for families that they realised didn't support lone parents, particularly female lone parents. And so the mitigating action they then put in place was to create a pass that would suit that kind of family. So it was a good example of looking across the impact that your budget decisions could make on particular groups. For Angus, I don't want to steal Shelley's thunder, but they've done a lot of work training elected members and community reps who are now holding officers in the council to account. And I'll let Shelley go into the detail of that. Glasgow City Council have packaged Fairer Scotland Duty Assessment and Equality Impact Assessment as enhanced decision making, and have carried out lots of training, including for officers from other organisations. And the Scottish Government have carried out a number of assessments, which are published on their website and also on the K-Hub, including the draft culture strategy, the early learning and childcare expansion, and regulations introduced around funeral expense assistance. So we've mentioned the K-Hub several times, and some of you have already signed up to it, but should you require any more information, it's quite a good area to engage in discussion with each other, as well as to find some of the resources. So anything I come across or any examples I'm finding, I'm putting on there. But if you have any examples of delivering on the Fairer Scotland Duty, it would be great if you could share them on the K-Hub. We're trying to just gather as much as possible so everybody can learn from each other. And if you have any examples, I've been emailing folk round about case studies. If you have anything that you think could be written up with a case study, that would be really helpful, and I can help you with that rather than you having to do that yourself. But do let me know if you've got anything that would be helpful to share with other colleagues across Scotland. And there's also an elected member briefing which we've published, which is also useful for officers new to the duty. And I know at the Community Planning Network a couple of months ago, I can't remember when the last one was, sorry, it was suggested that we could make it a community planning briefing for partners. So I've still to go back and tweak it. But it's still useful just now, and it's based on a SPICE briefing, which is also available, and the link's there in the slide for you. So we're waiting for questions at the end. We'll do questions at the end. So I'll skip that one, but here's a couple of questions for you as well to be thinking about, just to summarise what we did. So have you been carrying out any Fairer Scotland Duty assessments? What for you would be strategic decisions within a CPP, if there's something other than your LOIP that you think should be sort of included in that? What does an outcomes-based approach to tackling socioeconomic disadvantage and the inequality it causes look like? And can CPPs lead the way via their locality plans? What issues do you think might arise from the fact that not all partners in a community planning partnership are subject to the duty? What do you think community planning partnerships can do over and above what you're already doing to meet the Fairer Scotland Duty? I'm not expecting you to answer all of these today, but just to sort of maybe stimulate some thinking. And is there anything additional you think that existing LOIPs and locality plans, or do you think existing LOIPs and locality plans go some way towards addressing socioeconomic disadvantage? And what other support do you need to successfully implement the Fairer Scotland Duty? Okay, and I'll leave that there. Thanks.
Hanna, we'll change over to you. If you have your presentation ready, then okay. I will make you the presenter. Thank you very much, Miriam. If we are not, we might do a small survey afterwards, possibly to share some of those questions as well. So Miriam says it's a bit long, but sorry. We'll go with it for now. And so Hanna, if you click yes to that, you will have control of the screen. Great. Yes. Okay. We're good to go.
Okay, thank you. So yes, hello, my name is Hanna McCullough, and as Chris said, I'm National Co-ordinator for Local Child Poverty Action Reports. I'm based here at the Improvement Service, and I've been here since August last year, and all being well, we'll be here for another 3 years, helping to support local authorities and territorial health boards to produce local child poverty action reports. And what I want to do today is just to give a brief overview of the nature of the duty to produce local child poverty action reports, talk a little bit about how that relates to community planning and also to the Fairer Scotland duty, and then highlight a few resources that are available. And I'll try to be brief and leave some time for questions and discussion. So just before I do that, I just want to set the scene to remind us all of the overarching reasons and backdrop for the legislation and the local reports. And that really is the fact that Scotland are facing a bit of a child poverty crisis. Currently, there are around 1 in 4 children in Scotland live in poverty, and that figure is set to rise quite substantially over the coming years. And that's, problematic, not least for the children who are at risk of poverty, whose health and educational attainment and outcomes can be undermined, as well as their happiness and well-being. It's also potentially catastrophic. I mean, that's maybe a slightly emotive term, but it poses big problems for society as a whole, both in terms of the potential lost through those children not reaching their potential, but also the cost in terms of. So Joseph Rowntree Foundation, for instance, has estimated that £73 billion a year is spent on the consequences of poverty in the UK, and much of that will come from local budgets from social work and health and education. And this isn't something, this is a problem for local authorities and community planning partners across Scotland. We know, for instance, that every local authority has at least one ward where 10% or more of children are living in poverty. And in some areas, that figure is as high as 50%. So this is really something that needs to be prioritised across Scotland. And as I said, it's fairly urgent. We know that child poverty is set to rise substantially in the coming years. So by 2024, it's estimated that 1 in 3 children will be living in poverty. And that will be the highest recorded rate of child poverty. So yeah, it should be high on the agenda. And it's against that worrying backdrop that the Scottish Government introduced the Child Poverty Act, which was passed by the Scottish Parliament unanimously in 2017. And the sort of headline measure in the Child Poverty Act is a commitment on the part of Scottish ministers to reduce child poverty substantially by 2030. And it will do that against 4 key measures of child poverty. Now, I won't go into those measures in much detail, other than to say that they relate to relative poverty, absolute poverty, material deprivation and persistent poverty. And the other thing I'll say about those measures against which the Scottish Government is measuring its progress is that they are very much financial measures. So the child poverty will be reduced in Scotland if the incomes of families with children increase and their essential living costs decrease. It really is a framework and measures and targets that are about money and getting money into the pockets of children and families. So in that sense, it's a lot more laser focused really than the Fairer Scotland duty, which considers wider wealth and wider measures of deprivation. This is really about income and outgoings and how we can seek to increase those for those at risk of poverty. The legislation also places a duty on the Scottish Government to produce delivery plans every 4 years, highlighting the steps that they plan to take to tackle child poverty. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. And the legislation also places that local duty on health boards and local authorities. And again, I'll come on to that just now. Oh, I'm going backwards. Sorry, don't panic. So yes, the first of the delivery plans was produced by the Scottish Government last year, and it spans 2018 to 2022. And I won't go into huge detail about the contents of the plan. There is a lot in there, and I would recommend that you have a look at it, because there's a lot that relates to local action and as well as national action. What I would say is that sort of one of the key characteristics of the delivery plan is that it's very focused on the targets, the child poverty targets that I mentioned before. So if this is an area that you've worked in for a while, you might be aware that previous national strategies on tackling child poverty and poverty more generally were often slightly woolly, in that they talked about a wide range of things pertaining to low income and deprivation. So they would talk about breastfeeding, the built environment, health inequalities, educational attainment, and not have that really sharp focus on income and outgoings. This delivery plan is focused, and all the measures that are announced in it are categorised into one of three categories that have been sort of described as the key drivers of child poverty, and that's income from employment, income from social security, and reducing the cost of living. There's a very sharp sort of categorisation of policies, with a fourth category highlighting actions that prevent children and young people from becoming poor as adults and being poor parents. I won't go into any more detail given time constraints, but I'm happy to answer questions on that. So perhaps most importantly for our purpose, the Child Poverty Act places a duty on local authorities and health boards. The legislation itself is quite sparse. It doesn't go into massive detail. It says that local authorities and territorial health boards should produce action reports. They should be jointly produced on an annual basis. The first of the reports should be submitted by the end of June 2019, so next month. And the report should set out actions taken to reduce child poverty in the financial year 2018-2019, so past action that's already happened, and they must set out future actions for future years. And in terms of the substance of those actions, there is very little detail. The only reference is to the fact that the action plans should make specific reference to pregnant women and families with children, and how they access help with eligibility and applying for financial support. And that's a sort of reference to the success of initiatives like Healthier, Wealthier Children, whereby health services have helped to actively refer families with children into income maximisation advice. But that's the only, policy directive in terms of what needs to be in these reports. And the other thing the legislation says is that consideration must be given in the reports to those with protected characteristics. So under the Equality Act, those are protected characteristics. I'll talk a little bit about the steps that the guidance lays out that local authorities and health boards have to go through. Before I do that, I just want to highlight some of the sort of overarching themes that can be picked out of the guidance that might be of interest. So firstly, again, as with Every Child, Every Chance, the guidance highlights that there should be a focus on the drivers of poverty. So it's about what local authorities and health boards can do to increase income from employment, to reduce the cost of living, and increase income from social security, from social security and benefits in kind. So again, laser focus on income and outgoings rather than things like health inequalities and educational attainment. Although those things can also be described in the plans. Another characteristic that runs through the guidance is the direction to focus on, in particular, on priority families. So those are families that are at highest risk of poverty. So lone parents, households in which someone's disabled, households in which there are 3 or more children, minority ethnic households, households in which the child is aged under 1, and I can't see the last one. I'm having a mother's age under 25, which I knew off by heart until the very second I couldn't read it. So those are the priority families on which to which particular consideration should be given. The guidance also lays out 5 steps that local authorities and their partners should take in developing local child poverty action reports. And I'll run through these as quickly as I can. I'm aware of time. So the guidance highlights that local authorities and territorial health boards should identify their local partners. So the legislative duty is just on the local authority and the territorial health board, but the guidance lays out that community planning partnerships could provide a helpful vehicle for coordinating this work. So there is a hope that these action reports will describe action beyond just the local authority and health board, and that it will take into consideration the relevant action of wider partners. The second step is to do a needs assessment, so to understand the rates and nature of child poverty in the relevant area. And the hope is that this will go beyond just nationally available data on rates of child poverty, but it will also consider the practical obstacles locally that are preventing parents with children from moving into employment and maximising their income. So this might include service data, lived experience of people in poverty, staff expertise, anything that can help paint a richer picture and a better understanding of the gaps and the priorities and what they should be locally. And obviously community planning partners will hopefully have a role in creating that picture. The third step is to identify existing action to tackle child poverty locally. And yeah, I think what the guidance really highlights is that this should be action across all the levers available to local authorities and their planning partners. So it's not just about what can be done in schools, for instance, or what can be done through welfare rights work, although those things are both very important. It's about wider levers that aren't necessarily always associated with child poverty. So it's about housing, it's about employability, it's about transport, it's about planning, it's about really using all the significant levers that local authorities and their partners have to tackle child poverty, to identify new action. And there's an emphasis on the need to bring about a step change. So it's not about business as usual. It's really challenging consistently ourselves to try and identify areas that we can seek to influence those drivers of child poverty. And finally, to share what is working. I'm aware of time, and I think I've covered the sort of the key points. Will we move on to Shelley?
If you think there's a good time for it, is there? I don't know if there's any key things we have left. Otherwise, we can move on to Shelley and maybe take some of it in the discussion after.
Yeah, I think some of what I was going to talk about is about the support available in relation to this. So the slides will be available afterwards. So
yes.
And I'm happy to put some of that in writing or answer questions.
We're going to share this recording of the webinar and slides afterwards. We're going to send out links for you to find, but also to the Knowledge Hub groups that have been mentioned. Do you have a Knowledge Hub group?
I do, yes.
You do as
There's
well?
a Knowledge Hub which is called Local Child Poverty Action Reports.
So we will send links out to all of them. Shelley, I'm going to hand over to you if you're just about ready and still here. I can see you've turned on your sound now. So.
Yep.
Hi, Shelley, and thank you for waiting. Now we're
Hi there.
More practical implementation of this and experience around implementing this. Yeah, feel free to.
Yeah, just a couple of examples. Yeah, good to go. So I was just really keen to give some practical examples of how we've been delivering on some of the policy areas that have been mentioned by Miriam and Hanna there. But first of all, I just wanted to say that this work's been really essential for us to ensure that we're making smart decisions across the partnership, and it really does ensure accountability and has allowed us to have some of those really direct conversations with each other about how we're spending budgets and the impacts that they're having. In Angus, our community planning partnership includes sort of a 3-tier approach. We've got a wider network which meets twice a year, an executive meeting quarterly, and a board which is all the chief execs of all our organisations meeting quarterly as well. And they've really started to get under what Fairer Scotland Duty is and how we can use that as a tool to ensure that we're making the right decisions for the people of Angus. And that it's not just a tick box exercise. So how are we getting on in Angus? So this is our vision. Angus is a great place to live, work and visit. Quite vague, some might say, but also gives us lots of opportunity to deliver on our 3 priorities, which are handily reducing child poverty, improving mental health and well-being, and improving accessibility and connectivity. And when I say that, I mean the digital as well as the infrastructure, because we're a relatively rural area up here in Angus. So we're very aware now that the only way that we can deliver on these massive priorities is together and as a partnership in collaboration. But as Miriam said, that's due to the direct communication around our decision making. Sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. Councils, statutory bodies, we're all facing really hard decisions on budgets and resources just now and how to allocate them. There's a requirement, as a lot of people know, to become more efficient and sometimes smaller. But this duty really gives us the opportunity to ensure that our decision making is not detrimental to the people we serve and those most in need. This often conflicts with our communities who are increasingly telling us that our decisions are unfair. So a lot of the work we've been doing within our partnership around communication, engagement, performance is about taking the unfairness out of it. So increasing equality across the area is all about fairness, and there's some great work going on around the child poverty stuff and period poverty. So raising awareness has been one of the key factors for us, doing a lot of training, highlighting this. We use a lot of digital skills to get messages out there, so we use Yammer, we use Twitter, as well as through the community planning networks, a lot of face-to-face. So when we're going out talking about other areas of, for example, council business, so funding, we're talking about it, and just helping people understand the impact of the decisions that they're making. For example, one of the areas that we've been exploring in the area is winter maintenance, and one decision for Angus Council could be quite detrimental to our health services. So it's about being able to have those open discussions and an awareness of what it is we're trying to do here. And it's all moving us towards that outcomes-focused approach and ensuring that we have the evidence base in a lot of the decisions that we're making as well. The child poverty agenda has been really helpful with that. So as a bare essential, we put the Fairer Scotland duty diagram and the philosophy in the heart of what it is we're trying to do in community planning. I mentioned the child poverty work, and Hannah's given us a really good overview of that, but the child poverty action reports was the best and most recent opportunity we've had to date to really raise the awareness of Fairer Scotland duty. And we saw this when the report went to committee recently. So at the very start of our process, we'd started to fill out our Fairer Scotland duty assessment. And when it went to committee, there was great discussion about it, lots of good communication through elected members and through community reps, a lot of PR around it, the press picked up on it, and it saw our partners and our administration make the commitment to absolutely prioritise child poverty. So putting Fairer Scotland duty at the heart of that had really helped. This will also be really important when developing other key policy areas, and for us here in Angus, a great example of that will be the Tay City deal and the element around inclusive growth. So yes, we're being held account to the Fairer Scotland duty, but a big piece of work that we've done over the past year is to implement a youth engagement strategy, and it's worth just noting because the Fairer Scotland duty absolutely runs throughout this. It was a 4-page strategy, so as you can imagine, people absolutely loved it. They could read it in an hour easily. And one of the terrifying things is it's not my colleagues holding me to account, it's these young people that you see in front of you. And that really does terrify me at times, but it shows that we are using plain English with things, we're making things understandable, and we are being held account. So following up from this, we have a session next week with our young people where we'll be giving them an update on how we've been doing in terms of their asks of us. So that should be really interesting, and like I say, Fairer Scotland duty will play a role in that. Okay, so in terms of the practical measures, I mentioned that we used a lot of digital tools there, and within our community plan, which was formerly our LOIP, And within our annual performance reports, we're really clear about what Fair Scotland Duty means to us, and we make sure that all partners understand what that means. Miriam mentioned there as well about partners who aren't necessarily so really interested in this, because maybe they're a lot more up on risk than us, but they're really keen to implement it in their work and make sure that through our risk register and through our programme of continuous improvement, that even partners that don't have to deliver on this have sight of it and understand it as part of their wider decision making. So I mentioned our priorities. In order to deliver these priorities as shown here, we've been supported by the Improvement Service and Public Health Scotland to develop logic models, and that was really useful in delivering on the child poverty action reports. This has reduced duplication and highlighted areas of potential replication, and that was another element that we weaved into our logic models. So having a separate column there on how does this impact on Fair Scotland Duty, and are we putting people into hardship by some of the decisions that we're making? I love this diagram, my heart of Fair Scotland Duty. I'm sure you guys love it too. By putting the Fair Scotland Duty at the heart of all these things, we've been able to unlock extra resources for essential projects. A great example locally is our Glen Isla project, which is a project that supports women who have experienced domestic abuse or have been in the criminal justice system, and it's worked really well and really reduced our reoffending rates. And through being able to show our impact assessment, our Fair Scotland Duty impact assessment, we were able to secure an additional £650,000 for the next 3 years to expand this project and really start making a difference to those people most in need. Another one was our Hunger Holidays project. We had a pilot in the Easter holidays led by our education colleagues, and they were able to showcase through some of the thinking around inequalities that this really makes a difference in attainment and reducing the inequalities locally. In practical terms, when drafting plans and performance reports, we draft our Fair Scotland Duty assessment alongside. However, like Miriam mentioned, we're working towards an integrated model to align all potential impacts to ensure we're meeting our statutory obligations. Just a couple of examples locally that we put within our performance report, which very much carry the philosophy around inequalities. So getting young people involved in sport, engaging learning, again, increasing that attainment and hopefully reducing child poverty locally. Poverty in general, we're starting to use the term rather than breaking it up into child poverty, food poverty, fuel poverty, but really trying to dig into some of the issues that are impacting on people and making sure that when one partner is making decisions that they're not, the unintended consequence isn't that they're moving people towards another partner in terms of resources. So our goal is to have an integrated process. It would be great if we could have that digital that would take into account equalities, environmental, Fair Scotland Duty. We need to map out the needs of these assessments. We need to create the digital tool. So we're using Knowledge Hub a lot recently because we've got a working group looking at it, and really keen to roll this out on a wider level. And I'm wondering, off the back of this week and last week, if the local governance review gives us an opportunity to explore that. So that's maybe something that we as community planning reps need to discuss at our wider session. That's really everything from me. Really keen to just get stuck into some of the questions. But yeah, happy to talk to anybody that would like to offline.
Thank you very much, Shelley. The audience here is a bit quiet on questions, I must say. So we do have raised hands, but I'm not opening up for microphones or phone lines because it can create a little bit of noise terror at this end. So if you do have a question, please share it with us here. Miriam, you had some questions from the audience, but you might want to ask some of them of Shelley as well. You do know each other quite well, of course, so you might know. But some of the questions you had around for the audience, might be appropriate to touch on for Shelley as well.
Well, for everybody really, it was just about this idea of an outcomes-based approach to tackling socioeconomic disadvantage and what that looks like, and is that your locality plans? Do you think that's what that is? I'm just sort of, just because when I met with the Equality and Human Rights Commission, they were very keen on emphasising that and, getting away from a tick box exercise and all that kind of thing. Very, very keen to sort of think about, outcomes-based approaches, how do we measure that? How do we assess for that? Are we doing it already? I'd imagine that some of the integrated impact assessment, Fair Scotland duty assessments that we're doing would kind of lead to that, particularly any sort of actions and things that we're setting out in the logic models as well, in locality plans or any sort of performance reports. So I was just wondering if anybody's got any experience of that or anything they want to comment on it, or am I havering?
Well, Shelley, do you have any experience of these things?
Sure. Our locality plans link up to our community plan and have quite grand aspirations. One of the things we're trying to do locally with our locality teams is really tease out what our localities can do. So building that community capacity. So, for example, one of the things is exploring what funding mechanisms we would need to put in place. So Crowdfund Angus has been a really good win for us in terms of empowering communities to lever in the funding that they need to deliver the activities that they feel are necessary locally. And we've seen some great projects off the back of that, whereas people had traditionally got quite used to filling out an application form and then taking the date off it from 1 year to the next. So through the crowdfunding, that's been quite useful, and we're about to start moving towards Crowdfund Scotland, and we're really keen to see how we can use Fair Scotland Duty to really push that. And of course, participatory budgeting will be absolutely critical to some of that community capacity and actually delivering on the locality plans. So I know that there's some great work happening in Fife. So we're exploring all the different options, and my colleagues are creating a plan on that. Another thing is, off the back of the Child Poverty Summit we held, which was a regional event, there was a lot of actions came out of that that could potentially sit as an overarching. So key things that were brought up were around transport, regional welfare rights services, food cooperatives, because poverty doesn't end at the Angus border. You know, we've got issues across the Tay region, and it's about how can we work more effectively together to use the Child Poverty Act, to use these things to ensure that we're being able to raise these things to the level that they're needed. Because at the community planning board, yeah, we've got chief execs sitting around the table, but it's about increasing that awareness of what it is we're trying to do here and get the buy-in for it.
Thanks, Shelley. Now we've got a couple of questions coming in, so I'll just take them in almost random order. Hanna, I think this one is for you. Where Community Planning Partnership already has reporting mechanisms on poverty deprivation that incorporates actions on child poverty, can this be used as the LCPAR? I can't say that. Does it need to specify which the relevant LCPAR activity is?
I'm not sure if I completely understand the question, but so where the LOIP already has child poverty as an outcome.
They have reporting mechanism on poverty and deprivation that incorporates action on child poverty. Can this be used as the LCPAR?
I mean, potentially it could. I think what the Scottish Government is keen that this isn't, writing a report for the sake of writing a report. It's about ensuring that there are meaningful actions. So if those actions are already happening through community planning mechanisms and they're documented in the LOIP, I suppose that would be legitimate and it would make sense. I think for me, the value of having a separate local child poverty action report is that it really gives you the space to focus on, to make sure that there is that adequate focus on income and outgoings and households that are at particular risk of child poverty, and it's a place to make commitments for future actions and to measure the impact of those. If all those elements exist already within the LOIP, I can't see why that couldn't be a local child poverty action report. But I would hope that they were all there. The child poverty action report is a place to think about those things specifically through those prisms. So yes, they could be the same thing.
But for more detail, it's possible to contact you.
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. Happy to talk about that.
There's a question for you, Shelley. Do you have a Fair Scotland duty assessments published online yet from any that the Community Planning Partnership have undertaken?
Yeah, the most recent one would be the Child Poverty Action Plan. We did a Fair Scotland duty assessment on that, which was quite chunky. We put a lot of stats in it. It should be on our website. I can double check. But we put that, it would definitely be there in terms of our committee reports, because it went up alongside all the other required documents you've got to do for the committee reports. But happy to share that on the Knowledge Hub as well, to try and encourage some people over to it.
It's great, thank you. There's a you've, a question starting with you've, so I don't know who is it for, but you can decide amongst yourself. You've highlighted the need to raise awareness of these duties. Any experiences you'd like to share about communities, parentheses, not experiencing poverty, gaining an understanding and supporting decisions that impact on them by removing something to focus supports in other areas? So I think it's
So
how do you
more affluent communities?
Yeah, how do you
involved in? Sorry, no, I was just trying to.
Yeah, I think it's about how do you raise awareness of these duties so that people who experience something might be taken away from more affluent communities, for instance, or something, because it has a more an effect in deprived areas. Or
I haven't come across anything yet that anybody's set out what's happened in those kind of things. There was some discussion at an event I was at about mixed tenure housing, and that people who live in mixed tenure housing were more likely to be understanding of the needs of people with less money than they have, and therefore support services for them, if that's the kind of thing we're sort of getting at. I think.
Do you know of any sort of public awareness raising of these duties that any CPBs or organisations have been doing?
Yeah, not so far. No, nothing that I know that's been at a community-wide level. But I could be wrong. I mean, I'm looking for examples all the time, so there could be something out there.
I know some areas have done they've got third sector organisations like CPAG and Poverty Alliance to come and do training of both frontline staff and senior staff and elected members, so not the general public, but decision makers on sort of the causes of poverty, the structural drivers of poverty, to try and ensure there's a better understanding of the difficulties that people experiencing poverty face, and that has led to a more sympathetic approach and more commitment around the agenda.
Shelley, do you have any experience from Angus in sort of engaging with the public around these duties?
Through our performance report, we put out some messaging through Twitter and through our partner newsletters and things like that to show how Fair Scotland Duty was being delivered through the partnership. There's always more. Engagement was something that was flagged up at our self-assessment recently, that we need to do more to reach those who were least engaged with. So there's always work to look at that. One of the things we're looking to piggyback off is the new volunteering strategy work. So using that as a hook to get people interested in wider community capacity building type work. That'll be led by our third sector interface, but we're really, really keen to work with them on that. And just recently, our TSI has bought a massive building in the centre of Forfar that we're looking for organisations to co-locate to for economies of scale. So that's going to be really interesting as a test of change for greater engagement, not just with communities, but with our partners and organisations. So watch the space for that one, I guess.
Thank you. So we've come just past the hour now, so apologies for running slightly over. I don't have any more questions, so I'm actually going to stop here and not take any more questions. We are going to share this recording and also the slides and relevant links to K-Help groups and similar things with everybody who attended, and please feel free to share it with your colleagues who are working in this area as well. I know that in the Fair Scotland Judy K-Help group there are also a number of recordings that touch the same subjects and also slightly longer presentations on some of the things if you're missing something. But thank you all three for being part of this webinar. We'll also highlight, of course, the Community Planning Support Network website, cpsupport.scot, for other resources around community planning. But thank you all for attending, and thank you, Hanna and Shelley and Miriam, for doing this webinar. Do you have any final words, any of you?
No, just keep in touch. Get in touch if there's anything you want to know or want to share with us. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, likewise.
Yep, same.
Thank you all, and I'll end this webinar now. Thank you for taking part.